All right, so welcome to week two microeconomics. Focus of this week is twofold. First, study of markets, buyers and sellers, supply and demand, and then elasticity, which is an extension of our study of markets, especially an extension of our study of demand. So we'll explain as we go here. All right, so let me share my screen with everyone. So here's our week two module. All right, first you have the same four learning opportunities that you do every week. Either participate in the live Zoom session and or watch the recorded Zoom video. Of course, read chapters 3 and chapter 6. Download and review the lecture notes with practice questions and answers. That's especially important this week. And I'll talk about that more in a second. And then finally, watch the review online videos as necessary. The links to those videos are right here for this week. There fourfold, three videos on markets and one video on elasticity. So as I said, the week two lecture notes with practice questions and answers. All right, so starting here on page 2 of this document. So again, this document was emailed to all students through Canvas messaging. It's available on the week 2 module page, and it's available on the week 2 announcement page. We're going to be studying markets, and we're going to talk about how economists use the tools of supply and demand to analyze market scenarios and determine where is equilibrium price and quantity at the moment, and then what happens to equilibrium price and quantity when something in the market changes. So this file, this week 2 document, is loaded with all kinds of good information and review practice market scenarios for students to spend some time with before they take the quiz. So starting on page 2, this gives you an example of the 4 possible shifts of the supply and demand curves. And then on page 3, page 3 is an example of inelastic and elastic demand curves, which is chapter 6 material. Right. Then starting on page 4 here, there are just about 10, 12, 14 examples of market scenarios that are exactly like the market scenarios that students are asked to analyze on quiz 2. So when you're preparing for the quiz, make sure you review pages, was that 4 through 14. So you got 10 pages of example problems and with answers. So example market scenarios that shows you exactly how to tackle the types of questions that will be on the quiz. Right? In addition to that, when you go to the week 2 quiz, you click on this. I even provided here, it says, so when you go there's a sample or practice quiz for students to review. So in addition to those 10 pages of market scenario practice questions and answers, there's an additional practice quiz that you can download and should look over before you launch the real deal, right? At the bottom of the rest of this document is the lecture notes for chapters 3 and 6. So if you're not going to read all the chapters, at least read the lecture notes, because that'll give you highlights of the important material that we're covering. All right, so that's the quiz. So your academic responsibilities are the same. You got a quiz this week. Obviously, you got to finish the Connect assignments. That is week 2, chapters 3 and 6, Connect assignments. And then you have a discussion question. So Microeconomics investigates the individual components within the larger economy. One of those components is the labor market. And one of the big debates in the labor market are minimum wage laws. So for the week 2 discussion question, students are asked to watch this video here I put out by The Economist, and then debate whether or not minimum wage law is a good idea. Now, this is one of those sort of politically charged ideas in economics that often allow emotions to supersede intelligence. You're more than welcome to offer opinions into your answers. However, your opinions must be grounded in sound economic thinking. So when you construct your answer to this question or your contributions to our discussion issue here, make sure you consider the economics of markets, and then in particular, consider the economics of elasticity of demand that we're going to be covering tonight. All right, quick drink, and now we're off. So these PowerPoints are obviously available. Week 2 module. That's where I got these babies. All right, so what are we doing now? We're studying markets. That's the key idea here. Market is what? Any institution that brings together buyers and sellers. That's what a market is. Now for us, we're going to concentrate primarily on 2 types of markets. We're going to concentrate on product markets. Those include products and services. So you go to Staples and you buy paper, or you go to the dentist and you get your teeth cleaned. Or you go to your auto repair shop and you get your tires rotated, right? You go to the supermarket and you buy pretzels. You call your buddy up and you make arrangements to go play tennis or golf or whatever entertaining, basketball hoops at the gym. So we got all these goods and services that we purchase. Those are the markets we're most familiar with. In those markets, the buyers are households / individuals, people like us, and the sellers are businesses. Now, the other type of market is a resource market, like the one you're going to analyze for the discussion question. Land, capital, and labor, the economic resources. In the resource market, it's flip-flopped. The buyers are businesses and the sellers are households. So those are the 2 types of markets that we're going to be analyzing. Now, further along in the term, towards the end of our study, we'll visit one type of financial market, and that is currency markets. And we'll talk about how the forces of supply and demand affect exchange rates. But we're going to leave that on the back burner for the moment. So here is a graph of a market. So every market has buyers and sellers. The downward sloping red demand curve represents the buyers in the market. The upward sloping blue supply curve represents the sellers in the market. Economists are interested in price and quantity. The purpose of this exercise is to determine what is the current price and quantity in the market. And then when something changes, when some event affects the market scenario, what happens to price and quantity? So that's the whole purpose of our exercise. When we look at this graph, price is measured on the up-down vertical axis. Quantity is measured on the horizontal axis. So who are buyers and who are sellers? Our typical familiar understanding of markets when we talk about products and services. I see that everybody wants to get, their carpets cleaned, or they want to get party supplies for the kid's birthday party, right? They want to get a whole bunch of lawn materials because they want to make the yard pretty for the spring, right? So for product market, the buyers are us, households, that's the demand. And the sellers are businesses. In the resource market, like the one you're going to analyze for the discussion question this week, it's the opposite. The demanders, the buyers are businesses. Businesses buy labor. They buy labor in the labor markets. And the suppliers are people like us. We're the suppliers of labor, right? Again, we're interested in this, P star and Q star, price and quantity. So we're studying markets and we're using the tools of demand and supply to analyze markets, right? So far, so good. Now, here's the thing. We can't analyze the demand side of the market and the supply side of the market simultaneously. It's impossible. So we're going to explain markets by first examining demand, then discussing supply, and then bringing them back together. So pretty soon we're going to be saying, okay, what happens if we look at the market demand curve? If we look at the demand curve of one individual, right? But remember, we don't have a market unless we have buyers and sellers together. So every market needs a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve. But we're going to introduce and study them separately before we bring them back together to analyze market forces. All right. So having said that, what is demand? Well, we see what demand is here. We can either measure price and quantity using data, or we can measure price and quantity demanded using a graph. So what is demand? Demand is a schedule. A schedule of what? The various amounts of a good or service that buyers are, quote unquote, willing and able to purchase. Series of prices, specified amount of time, other things equal. So it tells us, okay, how much will a buyer purchase in this time frame of this good or service? And we know that it's not a matter of maybe, it's a matter of definite, because when we say, okay, schedule the various amounts of a good or service that a buyer is willing and able to purchase, we're not just saying they might purchase this amount. We're definitely sure that whatever price is in the market, we can identify the quantity of demand that will coincide with that price. All right. So when we think about demand, okay, to schedule the various amounts of good or service that buyers are willing and able to purchase, series of prices, specified amount of time. All markets have a select or a fixed amount of time. So if you think, okay, I'm going to go shopping for oranges. Well, we can analyze the orange market for this week. Next month, it might be different. But if we're analyzing the market for new automobiles, we might say, okay, this month, and then the time frame's longer because maybe market forces don't affect that particular industry as quickly. So the time frame won't be the same for every market, but there's definitely a time frame on every market, right? So other things equal, the most important determinant of supply and demand is the price. And we're going to talk about this idea of what's called the law of demand. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demand. So dude, think about anything you buy, right? Think about anything you buy and say, okay, if I'm going to buy socks, if I'm going to go buy, I don't know, I'm in the market for, I'm looking at maybe getting, in the wintertime, a couple pair of gloves to wear. The normal human experience is that when price falls, supply and demand goes up. And when price rises, supply and demand falls. So we have this inverse relationship between price and supply and demand. Right? That's what we call the law of demand. And that should sound pretty familiar to you, but there's 4 reasons why there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demand. The first is basic common sense. So just think to yourself, when I go shopping, if I was planning on buying something, if the price drops by a decent amount, would I think about buying more of that? Probably yes. And if the price goes up by a significant amount, you're like, will I buy less? Definitely yes. I would say I'm not going to buy as much. The other 3 reasons are a little bit more to deal with economics. The first one's called the law of diminishing marginal utility, which is this. As you consume more of a good or service, it provides less and less happiness. I just think about when you get pizza on Friday night. The first piece is super overwhelming great. Second piece, still pretty good. But by piece number 3, you're like, man, I'm starting to get stuffed, right? So this is a common experience with most consumption. As you consume more of a good or service, it provides less and less happiness, satisfaction, gratification, less utility, right? Therefore, you would only be willing to buy more if price went down, right? So diminishing marginal utility. The income and substitution effect. The income effect applies in all instances. Substitution effect only applies if there is a reasonable substitute available. Let me give you an example. You're gonna go shopping for some lunch meat. You're like, all right, I got 20 bucks and I'm expecting turkey lunch meat to be $5 per pound. So obviously, if you've got 20 bucks and it's $5 per pound, you think you can buy, well, 4 pounds. But when you get to the store, right, price is falling from $5 per pound to $4 per pound, your income goes further. So price down, increase in supply and demand, you can now consume 5 pounds. And then obviously the scenario would be reversed if you were expecting price to be 4 and you got there and it was 5, right? Price up, supply and demand it down. So when price changes, it affects the amount you can purchase, the supply and demand it based on your fixed income. Now, if there's a reasonable substitute, like, okay, I was going to go buy turkey, but I was also going to buy some roast beef. Well, if the price of turkey declines and the price of roast beef hasn't, you might be apt to substitute in a little bit more of that because of the change in price. So for these reasons, we call this the law of demand. All right, now, here's your typical downward sloping demand curve. Price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal, downward sloping demand. We take this data. Now, what is this the market for? It's pretty boring, mundane beginning right out of the textbook. It's the market for corn. So this is one buyer says, I'm willing and able to purchase this amount of corn this week at these prices. The price is $4, I'm willing and able to purchase 20 bushels per corn. If price falls from $4 to $2, quantity demand will increase from 20 to 55. Now here's the thing, we're mostly not concerned with one buyer. We're concerned with what's called the market demand. So we take all the buying habits of everybody, that's millions of buyers. And here's the thing, it's going to look the same. The demand curve is going to look the same. It's just that these quantities would be in millions as opposed to just 10, 20, 35, 55, 80. Right? Because the United States produced something like 14 billion bushels of corn last year or 2 years ago. Actually, I looked it up. I think that's pretty accurate, but total bushels of corn produced in U.S. 2022. Okay, so 13.7. Oh, I was pretty close. I said 14 billion, right? So you literally have millions of buyers, right? So what you do is you take all the buyers, add them all up, average it all out, and that gives you your demand curve. And that's what we're concerned with, the market demand. That's people like you and I that buy corn because we want to put it on our table. People that buy corn because they're going to make food products that use corn, sometimes the cornmeal. Other people buy corn because they're going to make high fructose corn syrup, which is a sweetener. And then you got buyers who just buy corn because they're going to make it as part of animal feed, right? Livestock feed. So you got millions of buyers of corn, right? Got your downward sloping demand curve. But here's the thing. The most important determinant of supply and demand is the price. So here's our market demand curve. And what do we observe? Well, if price changes, other things equal, right? Price down, quantity demanded increase. Price up, quantity demanded decrease. So other things equal, the most important determinant of quantity demanded is the price in the market. A change in price creates a movement along a single demand curve. Price down, quantity demanded up. Price up, quantity demanded down. But what happens when something other than price changes? All right, now here's where it gets interesting. Economists call these the non-price determinants of demand. So when something other than price changes, we're no longer going to be talking about a movement along a single demand curve. When one of these five factors affect the market, something else happens. What we have is called a shift of the curve. So we can either have the entire curve shift to the right, the entire demand schedule increase, or we could have the entire curve shift to the left. That is to say, the entire demand schedule, market demand decrease. So when one of these five factors affects buying habits in markets, we're no longer talking about a change in quantity demanded caused by a change in price. We're talking about a change in demand, a movement of the entire curve, right? Not a movement along the curve, the entire curve shifts. So economists are pretty particular about this. There's a huge difference between a change in quantity demanded caused by a change in price and a change in demand caused by one of these non-price determinants. And these are the babies that we need to familiarize ourselves with, because we're going to need to know these for the quiz to see how they increase or decrease demand, right? So taste and preferences, number of buyers, the easiest two to explain. So let's just think about the corn market and say, okay, what happens in the market for corn if you wake up tomorrow and say, hey, a bunch of studies came out and said eating corn reduces your chances of Alzheimer's by 28%. Well, you're like, man, it's not my favorite thing, but almost a 30% reduction in the chance of getting Alzheimer's just from eating corn, I'm in, right? So that means there's going to be an increase in demand. The taste or preference for corn has gone up. People like it more, so there's going to be an increase in demand. Now, I hope that this doesn't happen, but you wake up tomorrow and it says, oh, eating corn has been linked to certain types of cancer. Well, there's going to be a decrease in demand, a decrease in the taste and or preferences for corn. All right, so that one's pretty straightforward and obvious. The second one, straightforward and obvious too, called number of buyers. More buyers enter the market, it's going to be increase in demand. Buyers exit the market, decrease in demand. So when George Bush the son, was in office, the price of oil skyrocketed, which meant that the price of gasoline also skyrocketed. So what did we look for? Alternatives. Now, there's not a lot of alternatives, but we tried something called ethanol, and it's definitely a scientifically viable option. So we started making a gasoline additive out of corn. So a biodiesel fuel. So ethanol is produced from various plants. Corn is one of those, right? In Brazil, they use cane sugar because they got so much of it. And here in the United States, we started using corn. Here's the point. All of a sudden, you got a whole new group of buyers in the market for corn that weren't there before. All of these fuel producers that are using corn to make ethanol. So an increase in the number of buyers increases demand. Likewise, when that trend fades and those buyers are no longer in the market, fewer buyers, decreased number of buyers, decrease in demand. All right, ready for audience participation? I hate to put you on the spot, but you're the only one here. I have no friends. So here's the thing. I want you to think of one product or service where you would say these two things are substitutes. So I might say, here's one, like, okay, rice and potatoes. So I go shopping, I'm like, all right, I could get rice, I could be my starch, or I could get potatoes, right? Now, for some people, I'm like, well, it's rice or couscous, right? You get the idea.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that's the first one. Then the second one is complementary good. So, like, say, tennis balls and tennis rackets are complementary goods.
Mhm.
Right? Hotel stays in Vegas and airline service are complementary because lots of people, when they go to Vegas, they take an airline to get there.
Mhm.
So give me an example, if you can, of one good or service that we would consider substitutes for each other. And then give me an example of complementary goods where things are used in succession with each other.
Oh, or like chicken and turkey, or say like
Okay, yeah, okay, those are
chicken and duck.
definitely a good substitute. Okay, cool, there's one.
Mm-hmm.
And how about complementary goods?
It could be like cars and gasoline.
Okay, okay, good, good. All right, so let's stick with your chicken and turkey for the substitute example, right? So other things equal, is that okay? If we're analyzing the market for chicken and there's an increase in the price of turkey, there'll be an increase in demand for chicken, right? So increase in the price of substitute, increase in demand for the good under consideration. If on the other hand, we're saying, okay, we're analyzing the market for chicken, there's a decrease in the price of turkey, there'll be a decrease in demand for chicken, right? All right, and then we'll go with, how about we use, for complementary goods, we'll do cell phone service and smartphones. So the price of cell phone service has come down pretty substantially, especially when T-Mobile got FCC permission to use more of the bandwidth and such. So there's more options for consumers. So if there's a decrease in the price of cell phone service, what happens to the demand for smartphones, whether it be Android or iPhone? So it'll be an increase in demand.
Mhm.
So that's how one market is affecting another. If on the other hand, cell phone service had gone up in price, there would be a decrease in the demand for smartphones, right? So we covered 1, 2, and 4 here. Now we got to do buyer's income. Well, most of the time, buyer's income is pretty straightforward. Most of the time, when people have more income to spend, they buy more of things. There's an increase in demand. And when income declines, there's a decrease in demand. So what do we mean by change in income? Well, this is more of a macro phenomena, but when the economy is doing well and people are getting hired at a decent clip and wages are rising, people buy a little bit more of almost all goods and services, not equally across the board, obviously. And then when the economy goes into recession, which we're worried about now because we got this banking crisis, that's been pretty scary, right? So we got this banking crisis, there's most likely going to be a recession that's going to create a decrease in buyers' income. So we say, okay, how does that affect the purchase of goods and services? Again, normally when there's a decrease in buyers' income, there'll be a leftward shift, a decrease in demand. Right? Increase in buyers' income, increase in demand. But notice a little caveat here. What economists do is they differentiate between normal goods and what we call inferior goods. So big point here. Inferior goods does not mean bad. We're not making a judgment of anyone buying these. We're simply economists using positive economic analysis, trying to say, okay, what happens in the market for an inferior good when there's a change in buyer's income? So an inferior good would be, let me give you some examples. Store brands, generic items, retreaded tires, used automobiles, right? All of these will be considered inferior goods. Again, we're not judging the people that buy them, we're just trying to make sense of markets. So with inferior goods, it's the opposite. A decrease in buyer's income will increase the demand for those types of products and or services. So during a recession, we're going to see an increase in demand for those types of products, right? And then of course, during economic boom time, when there's an increase in demand, we'll see a decrease in demand for those products. Now, this is where a little bit of economic knowledge can make you some money if/when the economy goes into recession. And now they're saying like those people that are quote unquote in the know, the survey of economists and people in finance and such, it's up to like 61, 62% that believe there will be a recession in the next 6 months. Well, if there's a recession, there's going to be a decrease in buyers' income. If there's a decrease in buyers' income, it's going to be an increase in demand for some of those goods and or services that we just mentioned. Well, you can position yourself to buy stocks in those companies that do well. The other thing is you can think of like, this happened to Procter and Gamble back in the 2008 recession. They had overexposed themselves to the high-end aspects of what they sell. They sell a lot of personal care items like shampoo and soap and stuff. And they got into the high-end market where they were making nice margins. But then when when the economy went into recession, all of a sudden Americans became a lot more frugal and stopped buying those high-end items, and it crushed their stock price. So a little bit of economic knowledge can actually be pretty practical. All right, so we did the first four.
Quick
We
question.
did taste. Yeah, question.
I'm sorry. It's not really, it's kind of related to
go
you,
ahead.
not really, but if you don't
Go ahead.
mind, could you send a couple stock tickers we should pay attention to?
I mean, I put it this way. Right now, I would be hesitant to advise anybody to purchase anything because of the turmoil on banking sectors.
All right.
But I will say this, me personally, I never try to quote unquote trade stocks, but a good long-term holds. I'd be, and honestly, I think what people with it, a lot of times people overlook the obvious, like, man, when Amazon went down to 80 or 78 and now it's back up to 100, when Facebook, which is now Meta, that went down to 80, that's all the way back up to 200. I mean, Google was down a little bit, that's back up 30%. I mean, those are these, Walmart is, not anymore. They're basically a supermarket. They sell so much, supermarket items.
Mhm.
I think the other thing is, again, that's more of a finance question than an economics question. But whenever people ask me that, I'm like, if your investment goals are short term, like I don't have any short term. I wish I did. Like everybody's looking for that. Like I wish I would have known about that AI company that came out, 6 months ago where the stock's up 300%. And I heard about it on CNBC, but if I knew that, I'd be living in a bigger house. But I generally am sort of like the more conservative. Okay, buy the S&P 500 or buy those big name companies that are going to be around for the next 20 years, and you're not going to go out of. The other key thing is, and I thought a lot about this last time with the banking crisis, is not only buy, those are diversified. Don't put like, if you got $1,000 to invest, buy 5 different companies. If you got 10 grand to invest, buy, 5 different companies for buy $2,000 worth, because you're not going to hit a home run every time, and that way you sort of diversify your risk.
Mhm.
Okay, so where were we? So the last one, expectations. So expectations about future product price, future product availability, and future income. So if you think you're going to be doing better in the near future, there's going to be an increase in demand. We talk about future income. So this is usually not the case we talk about. It's usually a time it's talking about worry about expectations of lower income in the future, and it's actually contributing to recessions. If you work in a factory and there were 78 people employed there, and now you're down to like 62, and you're looking around saying, man, there's going to be more cuts to come. I mean, if I was working at Amazon right now, I'd be a little bit nervous. They just cut 9,000 more jobs yesterday. So the expectation that your income will drop generally leads to a decrease in demand for many goods and services, especially things that people don't necessarily need, that they're sort of discretionary spending. Right? Now, the other expectations are interesting. So expectations about future product price. So a lot of people were correct when they said, I think automobile prices will be coming down next year. So if you're saying, okay, what will happen in the market for automobiles today? Because remember, various amounts of goods or services consumers are willing and able to buy a series of prices, specified amount of time. So what happens in the market today, if we expect lower prices in the future, there will be a decrease in demand. And that's what happened last year. People said, look, they're going to figure out some of these supply chains, and they're going to get those $2 chips that are preventing them from making, the $40,000 automobiles. And prices have come down. The other expectation is about future product availability. So, 1999 Y2K, when people were worried that your ATM card wouldn't work and that, there'd be some computer glitches. People went and hit the ATM. There was an increase in demand for that service the last week of 1999. There was also an increase in demand for things like food, like, bread, milk, eggs type thing, basics, because they're like, well, if there's some glitches and I can't get there or I can't buy it for a few days, at least I'll have it. All right. All right. Now let's talk about supply. So here's the thing about supply. This is going to sound highly similar to demand when we start defining it and explaining it. But the one key idea is that most people think of price as obstacle. Like, okay, that you're familiar with that. Like, you like lower prices, you don't like higher prices. When you're talking about supply, think from the standpoint of the producer. You're now the seller. So for you, price is not obstacle, it is reward. So, this is a good thing for you, right? This is something that, you look forward to, you want more of. So supply is the various amounts of a good or service or a resource that sellers are willing to be able to make available for sale, series of prices, specified amount of time, other things equal. Now remember, you're going to have this discussion question on the minimum wage laws. And in the minimum wage market, the buyers of the businesses, the suppliers are us, people, that are working in that low skilled work arena. So you're willing and able to make more available for sale if the price is higher, right? So the various amounts of a good or service or resource that sellers, producers are willing and able to make available for sale, series of prices, specified amount of time, other things equal. So unlike demand, there's this direct relationship between price and quantity supply. Price up, quantity supplied increases, price down, quantity supplied decreases. And unlike the law of demand that had 4 nice economic reasons, for this one, we only use one. The idea is pretty simple. Okay, if you're a producer, you want to make more available for sale because price is going up, you're going to have to incur more costs. It's going to be more labor, more inputs, more materials and such. But you're okay with that as long as price is going up. So if price is increasing, you justify more inputs and higher costs associated with those inputs. And we're going to be examining that in the next week or two, the theory of the firm. All right. So just like when we talked about demand, we can represent supply graphically or numerically. So this is the graph of one farmer. And this is how much corn this farmer is willing and able to make available for sale at a series of prices for this specified amount of time, 1 week, other things equal. But remember, we're typically not interested in one seller. This is microeconomics, so we will examine market models when we talk about one seller. We're talking about the monopoly. So that's a few weeks away. And we'll talk about the monopolists and the pricing power and pricing decisions and such. But for now, we're going to analyze markets where there's lots of buyers and lots of sellers. So we're analyzing the market supply. So if this is the corn market, there's literally something like 4,600 corn farmers. So that each one of those contributes something to the supply, right? So again, other things equal, the most important determinant of quantity supplied is the price in the market. When you're looking at the market supply curve, the price of a commodity goes up, there'll be an increase in quantity supplied. Price goes down, there'll be a decrease in quantity supplied. So price is the most important determinant of quantity supplied. But what happens when something other than price changes? Now, for demand, for supply, oops, too fast. There are 6 of these non-price determinants. For demand, there were 5. But the top 4 are the most important, right? So resource prices, technology, taxes, subsidies, as sellers, number of sellers. These are the most widely relevant. The other 2 are applicable in certain situations, we'll say, right? So we're gonna say, okay, how will these non-price determinants of supply shift the supply curve? Okay, so it's a similar idea. So first, a little bit of definitions. Resource prices. So resources, factors of production, inputs. They all mean the same thing. Economic inputs, economic resources, economic factors of production. They all mean the same thing, right? These are the land, capital, labor that businesses need to produce goods and services. So if you're a farmer, you need irrigation, you need fertilizer, you need tractors, right? And then you need some labor. So resources, inputs, factors of production, right? They're the necessary land, capital, labor that producers need to make goods, produce goods and services. If there's an increase in the price of these resources, that is to say, producers have to pay more for them, there will be a decrease in supply. Now be careful here because it looks like then the supply curve moved up, but any leftward shift, whether it's demand or supply, is always a decrease. And also look here and say, okay, what happened? All the quantities on this new supply curve are lower than the original supply curve. So an increase in the price of a resource or a factor of production causes a leftward shift of the supply curve. The entire market schedule of supply has shifted left and it's decreased. If on the other side, on the other hand, the price for a resource decreases, there'll be an increase in supply. That is to say, all producers are paying less for fertilizer, there'll be an increase in supply. Right? Number two, then even easier, number four. Number four, number of sellers. So we're going to be talking about competitive markets, and for now, that's what we're doing. Saying, okay, what if there's a large number of buyers, a large number of sellers? If the interaction of buyers and sellers affect the marketplace, right? So we're going to be talking about this idea of pure competition, where it's easy for new entrants, for new firms to enter an industry that's 2 weeks away. Increase in the number of sellers shifts the supply curve to the right. Decrease shifts supply curve to the left. Now, what about technology? Generally speaking, we talk about productivity technology as a good thing, and any improvements in technology / productivity will shift the supply curve to the right. And you don't have to write this down now because we'll get into it later, but productivity is simply a measure of how much output you get per unit of inputs. If you hire 10 workers and you're cranking out 20 units per day, and then all of a sudden you still have the same 10 workers, but now you're cranking out 30 units per day, we call that an increase in productivity, more output for the same level of inputs. So generally speaking, there's an increase in supply when technology improves. But there's no doubt that we get out of a temporary disruption to technology. So for instance, years ago, we had a situation where there was like a blackout in the northeast corner of the United States for a few days. No electric service available on Thursday and Friday, 1 week in August. And that meant that there were fewer financial services available during that month. The leftward shift in supply caused by disruption in technology. All right, now here's the one that students they're familiar with half of it, but not the other half. So you talk, up one more. You talk about taxes, everybody knows what we mean by taxes, right? Government taxes, businesses, right? As we know that, and it's very simple to understand this idea, but there's an old adage in economics. If you want more of something, tax it less. So if we decrease the tax on producers, there will be an increase in the supply, a rightward shift supply curve. If we increase the taxes of producers in a certain industry, there'll be a decrease in supply, right? The one that students are a little less familiar with are subsidies, right? So a subsidy you can think of as taxes in reverse. So the industries that get subsidized are things like geothermal, wind, solar. They're the ones receiving subsidies at the moment. to large degrees, and that's because they need some government support to compete in their market. So let's just think about the solar industry 15, 20 years ago. Solar energy was a great idea, but it wasn't advanced enough to produce electricity at a price that's low enough per unit to compete against coal, and natural gas, and oil, and even like hydroelectric and nuclear. So if the government increases subsidies in an industry, there will be a rightward shift in market supply. Now, of course, Mr. Trump wasn't as, we'll say, enthusiastic about wind and solar, and he cut many of these subsidies, so there was a decrease in supply. And of course, Biden comes in and he's like, okay, we're all about this. More subsidies, increases supply. So again, these four, resource prices, technology, taxes and subsidies, and number of sellers are definitely the most important. There could be times when expectations and price of other goods apply in certain situations. So we'll briefly discuss them. Right. So in the book, it even has it like I would say an obscure type of an example for this. If you're a producer and you're expecting lower prices for the product you sell or the service you sell in the future, you might rush to sell more today, increase in supply. So they give the example of a jeweler who might think that the price of gold is going down. He might try and sell more today. But if you think price is going up, you might withhold some of your supply today based on expectations of future prices. The last one's a little more applicable. Prices of other goods. If you are a producer, manufacturer, and you can, generally speaking, you can adjust your output between two different types of products. Like a farmer has 30 acres and says, like, all right, I plant 28 acres, and every year I leave two to furlough to get, to repair themselves, and I rotate that out. So I'm planting on 28 acres. I could do 14 acres of soy and 14 acres of corn. 50-50 split. Or I could say, well, I think the price of corn is going up, so I'm going to plant more corn and less soy, right? So if a manufacturer can quickly and efficiently switch between two different types of manufacturing, then sometimes the price of other goods will impact the supply. But generally speaking, we're most concerned with the top four here, right? All right, let's bring it all together. Let's bring it back together. So here we have our weekly data on market demand and market supply for the corn market. So we got the price on between $1 and $5 per bushel, right? So price is somewhere between $1 per bushel and $5 per bushel. Here's the market demand, quantity demanded by the millions of buyers, and the market supply, all the producers, the sellers. So if price is $4, what's going on at $4? Quantity supply is 10,000, quantity demand is 4,000. Quantity supplied exceeds demand. Buyers aren't all super crazy enthusiastic, right? At $2, the opposite's happening. Buyers are willing and able to purchase 11,000 bushels, but sellers are only willing and able to make available for sale 4,000 bushels. So, as if led by the invisible hand, the rationing function of prices, the interaction of buyers and sellers. Here's what's happening. Buyers are trying to maximize their utility, right? The happiness, satisfaction, gratification they get from consuming this product. Rational behavior on the side of the sellers. They're trying to maximize profit. No third party, no government gets involved. They ultimately end up at equilibrium. This week, this temporary situation, and it's important to identify this idea that equilibrium is a temporary situation. The price of corn is $3 per bushel. and there's 7,000 bushels bought and sold, right? So that's where we are this week. Now, two observations. First, Adam Smith realized when he wrote The Wealth of Nations and he introduced his idea of markets and efficiency, that this does not mean everyone's happy. There were buyers who were waiting for the price to drop to $2 and they went home without corn. There were sellers who were waiting for the price to go up above $3 and they didn't get to sell their corn. So that's the first observation. Doesn't mean everybody gets what they want. But this is more important. From an efficiency standpoint, we're going to be discussing in detail the idea that markets tend to produce both productive efficiency and allocated efficiency. So the invisible hand and the rationing function of prices generates both productive and allocated efficiency. And we're going to be discussing that in detail in our study of micro. The idea of allocating resources to the exact degree that makes society happy as far as the benefits and costs of using resources, and producing at the most cost-effective method through competition, right? Now, graphically, this looks like this. All right, quantity demand and quantity supply are at equilibrium at the moment, $3 per bushel, 7,000 bushels bought and sold. But remember, this is just the beginning of our work, not the end. Right? This is just the beginning of our work, not the end. So all we did was all the background work to get to say, okay, now we understand what happens in markets, how we get to equilibrium. So here's where the real work begins. We're going to start analyzing situations where something changes in the market. So whenever you're going to analyze a market scenario, you're always going to start by drawing this. All right, so for the moment, just ignore here where it says demand, supply, increase in demand. You're always going to draw a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. You don't need these little arrows over there. Right? Those are cute, but if you want to draw them, that's fine. All right, label this as P, says price here, that's fine. Oops. Label down bottom on the right as Q. So make sure you have your vertical axis labeled correctly, your horizontal axis labeled correctly. You got your downward sloping demand curve. This is your buyers in the market. You got your upward sloping supply curve, your sellers in the market. And equilibrium, this is where we are today, E1. So there's a certain price and certain quantity in the market. So everything, okay, this is where we are today in the market. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, what happens when something other than price changes? How will that affect demand or supply? And then how will that affect equilibrium, right? How will that affect demand or supply? And then how will that affect equilibrium? Well, one really good way to learn this material is to go over the practice quiz. So we look, say, okay, here's the quizzes, right? You can go right where my quiz 2. All right, so we can go to our preview here. And we might as well say, okay, let's pretend like I'm a student and I gotta prepare for the quiz. I gotta know about changes in demand and supply and how it affects equilibrium, price, and quantity. Right? Well, I gotta know about this. Practice quiz will probably help me. So you can't draw in Canvas. So instead of drawing the graphs, you're ultimately going to refer to these graphs, A, B, C, and D. A demonstrates an increase in demand, B, a decrease in demand, C, an increase in supply, and D, a decrease in supply. All right, we'll come back to these in a moment, and we'll talk about the importance of identifying the shift, and most importantly, what happens to price and quantity. But let's look at an example problem, and then we'll pretend for the moment that the answers aren't here. All right. So it says, okay, what happens in the market? It says the FDA signals it intends to take Juul cigarettes off the market for a month. How will this announcement affect the market for Juul cigarettes? So in 1 month, the FDA says geez, no more Juul cigarettes. All right, so we got to go back to our little analysis here. We say, okay. So if we think that Juul cigarettes won't be available in a month, that's going to affect expectations about future product availability, right? So we do this four-step process. First, we identify the market. In this case, Juul cigarettes. Second, we identify the non-price determinant of supply and demand. In this case, we know that Juul cigarettes won't be around in a month. That means there's going to be an increase in demand today based on expectations of future product availability. All right. Third, we draw our shift in the curve. And then lastly, we say what happens to equilibrium price and quantity. So it's the market for Juul cigarettes. The non-price determinant is the future availability of a product is in doubt here. All right. Number three, it increases demand. And then most importantly, final observations. At our new equilibrium, price up, quantity up. All right, and then we're finished. Now, if you look back here on our answer sheet, and this is how you'll do the quiz, four-step process. You identify the market, Juul cigarettes. You identify the non-price determinant of demand or supply, expectations about future availability. Now, you only got like 11 to choose from, right? So you're either going to use your non-price determinants of demand, which are right here, like these five, or your non-price determinants of supply, which are these six. Now I can tell you, you're probably going to only have to worry about the top four because I made the question,
Okay.
right, for these, and you know, when it comes to supply. So the
Okay.
four-step process, you can say, okay, you minimize video, there we go. Identify the market, in this case, Juul cigarettes. Identify which non-price determinant of supply or demand is affecting the market. And people say, okay, expectations about future product availability. That's going to affect demand. That increases demand. Now, instead of drawing the graph, you just refer to these. And this same little drawing is available on the quiz. You don't have to draw the graph to say, you know there's an increase in demand. So just like graph A shows an increase in demand.
Mhm.
What does that do to price and quantity? Price up, quantity up. So our four steps, last one, the result, price up, quantity up. So that's how you're going to analyze all these market scenarios. Just do
So
the
question.
four-step process. Yeah.
It's not a multiple choice question.
No, you're gonna see the quiz as this,
Mhm.
but you're not gonna see A, B, C, and D.
Right.
Like,
Okay.
these are the answers. So
Right.
your quiz is gonna have four questions like this, but it's not gonna have answers there, right? You're gonna have to provide these answers, right? Now remember, you don't have to draw a graph. You're gonna say, what's the market? Which of the non-price determinants of demand or supply is affecting the market? What will, how will that change the market? So you're like, oh, it'll be exactly like graph A, an increase in demand. And then what does that do? The results at the new equilibrium, price up, quantity up. All right. Now, I want to do the second one because on the quiz, there are four questions. And for three of the questions, you're going to have a scenario where either something affects demand or something affects supply. But on one of the questions, you have a situation where something affects both demand and supply. And that creates a unique outcome, right? So let me show you something first, and then we'll come back to number two here, right?
Yeah, because I'm
So-
still a little confused by that first one.
Okay, well, let's do it over again. We got time.
Yeah, because I'm
So-
just saying, hypothetically, if it was just me, like taking the test right now, and I read that the FDA signals its intent to take Juul cigarettes off the market in 1 month, how would this announcement by FDA affect the market for Juul cigarette? So on the test, it will have like the
Here's the
mock
key.
test.
Here's
Huh?
the key. When you're taking the quiz, what you need to have right with you, right, are these 6 non-price determinants of supply
Right,
and these 5 non-price determinants of demand.
right,
As soon as you read the scenario, you're like, all right, it's gotta be one of these things. And honestly, right, you really can narrow it down to 5 of these non-price determinants of demand and 4, the top 4 here, because I'm telling you that, I didn't use these 2.
right.
They're just rarely applicable. So when you read the scenario, you read it over and you say, okay. Oh, shoot, sorry. There we go. All right, the FDA says there's not gonna be any more of these cigarettes on the market in a month. All right, how's that gonna affect the markets? And you gotta think to yourself, all right, is it gonna affect demand or supply? And you think, oh, people are gonna rush out and buy them because they're worried about them not
Right.
being around anymore. One of the non-price determinants is expectations about future availability.
Right.
All right, so that's the, right, so you go, number 1, Juul cigarettes. Number 2, it's gonna affect demand because it's gonna affect the increase possibility of people like these. I better run out now and buy these because they're worried about the expectation about them being around. And then you say, okay, well, what does that do? That increases demand. Now, if you were doing this in my class, like if you were sitting in class, you'd have to draw the graph.
Right.
But in this case, you're like, okay, if that happens, it's graph A, an increase in demand. And then you say, well, what does that do to price and quantity? At the new equilibrium, right? We were here, increase in demand from D1 to D2, price went up, quantity went up. Right, and then you're
Right.
done.
So can I see that side by side with
Sure, which one?
the demand sheet with the 6 points on there?
So this one? Oh,
No,
no, I
yeah,
know what you mean. I got you.
yeah,
These are the 6 non-price determinants of supply,
the supply and
and
then
here are the, we need to do on, yeah, we're going too far.
there it is.
Here's the 5 non-price determinants of demand.
Okay. I was trying to see if the question was directly correlating to that order with the ABCD, because I wouldn't have thought to put market joules and then the second one I wouldn't have,
Well, then put it this way, when you're going through these, the first part should be, when you read these practice questions, right, just look at number 2, it says, conditions are perfect in Iowa for growing of delicious apples. And then it says, at the end of the delicious red apples become more popular. And it says, how would these 2 events affect the market for red delicious apples? So, you're never gonna have any problem identifying the market. It says, how would it affect the market for red? So part A is gonna be a given, basically,
right.
right? It's like, okay, there's the market, right? So, all right, well, let's continue on. We can come back to another question, but, and it'll probably come easier as we go through these.
Okay.
I want to show you something real quick. So let's just do a one where, oh, we can do this one. It's fine. We'll use this one. So this is the rare question where you say, I have to analyze 2 events happening at the same time. So it says, okay, first, conditions are perfect in Iowa for growing red delicious apples. So you have a boom in the growing season, right? So is that going to affect demand or supply? If conditions for growing apples are just amazing.
Supply.
Correct. Okay, good. Then the second time it says they become more popular with consumers. Is that going to affect demand or supply?
Oh, demand.
Correct. So we got an event that's going to affect supply and an event that's going to affect demand.
Mhm.
So this first one says, okay, perfect growing season. So we look at the supply determinants and we say, okay, which of these applies to that? Well, is it change of resource prices? No. Is it technology? No. Is it taxes and subsidies? No. Number of sellers? Yes,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
There's going to be more for sale. There's going to be increased number of sellers. So we know it's the market for red delicious apples. There's going to be more sellers. Now, you could probably say, you could make an argument like, oh, it's technology, like because everything was perfect. And I would take that if you said that, because they're both going to lead to the same result. But most of the time, it's pretty obvious. It's like, it's going to be this one. So, okay, there's more sellers, increase the number of sellers. So what's that going to do? That's going to shift supply to the right, right? So
Mhm.
let's assume that's the only thing that happened in our problem. We say, okay, all right, first, apples, increased number of sellers, increase in supply, just like graph C,
Okay.
right? You know, and that, again, I'm referring to this right here, graph C,
Mhm.
A, B, C. So, and that would decrease price from our current equilibrium to our new equilibrium and increase quantity, right?
Okay. Okay.
So price down, quantity up. And see, it says here, price down, quantity up. Now, if that was the
Okay.
only part of the question, you'd be done. You'd be done, right? But here's the thing. I'll show you this on the PowerPoint real quick. We call these the unique or special cases. They're a little bit complex where when you have an event that affects both demand and supply at the same time, one of your two variables, price or quantity, is going to be what we call indeterminate. And basically, we're saying we're not sure what happened. And the reason being is because when we look and say, all right, for this one event's going to affect demand, one event's going to affect supply. Was there a huge change in demand and only a small change in supply, or vice versa? Were they the same? You just don't have enough information to determine that. But when you look at the scenario, it will be obvious that one of the variables moved in a certain direction. The other one, you're gonna be like, well, it went up and down because of, demand and supply changing. And then you have this result called indeterminate, basically saying not enough information to know, we can't be positive. So let's go back and see first what happened to demand. We said, okay, we already did our supply side of the scenario. Then the same time, these Red Delicious apples became more popular with consumers. Well, if that's the case, if Red Delicious apples became more popular with consumers, then this one should be pretty straightforward. We say, okay, that's going to be what? More popular, it's number one right there, right? Taste and preferences. Or you could say more buyers. Either one would be cool. If you said increase the number of buyers or increase in taste and preferences, right? That's going to be acceptable. So we wrote down increase in preferences,
Mhm.
just like graph A. So we started here at demand one, rightward shift, price up, quantity up. So we write that into our little scenarios, okay. Result, price up, quantity up. Now we just compare these two. It's okay. The increase in supply drove price up, price down, quantity up. All right, more supply, price down, quantity up. More demand, price up, quantity up. So we know for certain quantity went up because the increase in supply caused quantity to go up. The increase in demand caused quantity to go up. But look, for price, our market change in supply is driving price down. Our market change in demand is driving price up. Price is what we call indeterminate. It's just a fancy way of saying not 100% sure. We don't know. Not enough information, basically.
Okay.
Right? So remember, on the quiz, there are 4 questions. Only one of them has an indeterminate result.
Okay.
Right? 3 of them, there's only one event, either demand or supply. So, and they're pretty, because it'll say in the question, just like this one, where it says, how will these 2 events, that'll be the
Right.
key, like, oh man, I'm gonna have something, something affecting demand and supply at the same time.
Okay.
Very cool. All right, so these are great to review. Definitely review these, right, before you take the quiz. All right, so I'm going to leave this open, see how much time we have left, but we got to move on to our study of elasticity because
Okay.
that's important for our discussion question. All right.
Okay.
So
Yeah, because I know in the first test I got caught up in wording a little bit.
in the first quiz,
Yeah, the first quiz.
what was it?
No.
What was the first quiz on the production
Yeah.
possibility frontier?
We can keep going though.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we already know this. There's this inverse relationship between price and supply and demand. The law of demand. It'll go, the price goes up, supply and demand, it goes down. Price goes down, quantity demand, it goes up. We know that. Like this is all that to us. All right, we looked at it graphically and we said, okay, price up, quantity demand down, price down, quantity demand, it go up. But now we're going to take a closer look at that and say, okay, but how much? How responsive are buyers to change in price? We just talked in general when we introduced it. We said, okay, generally speaking, if the price goes up, there'll be a decrease in supply and demand. If the price goes down, there'll be an increase in supply and demand, right? But now we're going to take a closer look and say, but how responsive are buyers to change in price? And economists use this fancy term called elasticity to determine whether buyers are relatively responsive or not responsive all that much. So is there a huge response or a rather muted response, all right, when price changes? So when buyers are responsive, economists call this demand is elastic. When buyers are not all that responsive, demand is inelastic, all right? So these two terms, elastic and inelastic, they simply mean buyers are quite responsive to a change in price, or they're not all that responsive to a change in price, right? Because sometimes students see this and they're like, oh, I don't get this, I'm all confused. Don't let the language, the lingo get you confused. It's not that complicated. Elastic simply says, okay, when there's a change in the price of this good or service, buyers are pretty responsive to that change in price. Price goes down, they buy quite a bit more. Price goes up, they buy quite a bit less, right? When demand is inelastic, price goes down, they don't buy that much more. Some, but not that much more. Price goes up, they don't respond by buying that much less. So 4 factors generally determine elasticity of demand. And the first one is the number of substitutes for that product. So just think to yourself, okay, what's something I buy where there really aren't a lot of substitutes? I think about that. I go, say, okay, gasoline, right? It's not like you can put other things in your car to make it run. You can't run your gas on your car on milk. It's funny though, because milk costs more per gallon than gasoline does. Right, so it's not even, that wouldn't be a good substitute anyway. But you can't run it on water, right? So when there's not a lot of substitutes, we're going to expect demand to be rather inelastic, not all that responsive. But when there are many substitutes, we're going to see the demand for that product or that service will be rather elastic, right? There'll be quite a substantial response from buyers, right? The second one, I'm going to skip number 2 for the second one. The second one is number 2. I'm going to go to this one. Luxury versus necessity. So if you have to buy something, then you're pretty much buying it, right? So there can be some response by buyers, but not all that much. So when we're looking at or analyzing the market for necessity, we're going to find out that demand is rather inelastic. Buyers are not all that responsive. As opposed to luxury goods where buyers have a choice, change in price will create a significant change in supply and demand. A pretty decent response from buyers. Now, proportion of your income. When you go to buy something like a box of salt, do you even look at the price? Because you're like, I don't buy it that often. It goes empty in my house like once every 2 months, right? And it only costs, it's not, you make 30, 40, 80 grand a year. It's such a small portion of your income. So generally speaking, when you talk about the proportion of your income, when something costs little, changes in prices don't really affect quantity demand that much. Demand is inelastic. When stuff costs lots, like an automobile, because that could be 100% of your income, right? then change in price is going to cause significant change in supply and demand. Demand is rather elastic. The last factor is how much time do buyers have to respond. You go to the ball game, you're at a concert, right? You're at the movies, wherever it may be, and you're super crazy thirsty. And you really want a bottle of water. You don't feel like paying $5 or $6 for a bottle of water, but in that frame, in that context, you don't have really time to change your habits. You're going to pay the money because you're stuck there. Like, or you can leave and miss the ball game, but that makes no sense because you spend $70 for the ticket or maybe more. So when you don't have much time to respond, demand tends to be rather inelastic. Given more time, demand tends to be elastic. Now, another example is like, okay, when people see that gasoline prices might remain elevated, they might seek out more fuel-efficient automobiles in the long run, but right now they're stuck with the car they have, right? So these four factors, generally speaking, are how we can determine elasticity. Now, students hate this, but there's two sort of analytical mathematical approaches to determine elasticity of demand. The first one's the one they really hate, but the second one's a lot more relevant and definitely relevant to our discussion about minimum wage. All right. So the first one's called the price elasticity coefficient. And the second way to determine elasticity from an analytical mathematical standpoint is the total revenue test. So what is elasticity measuring? How do we determine mathematically? Well, we do this, we call this thing, use this thing called the elasticity, the coefficient of elasticity. And what we're doing is we're measuring percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. So we don't use change in quantity demanded over change in price. We have to use percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. And here's why, right? Because if price went from $1 to $2, right, that's a $1 increase, right? But it's 100% increase in price for that item, as opposed to something that costs $30,000. If that goes from $30,000 to $30,001, I mean, it's nothing, right? You're gonna go like, I was gonna go buy a really nice used car off this dealership, and when I went to go buy, the guy's like, "Oh, today it's $1 more." You're like, "What the hell? Who cares? $1." You're like, "Okay, I got it," right? So percentages just make more sense from an analytical standpoint. We're measuring percentage change in quantity demand over percentage change in price. Now, here's an important observation: the law of demand, right? So price up, quantity demanded down, price down, quantity demanded up. We already talked about this. And, at this point, it's ad nauseum. So which means our numerator or a denominator, one of those two, is going to be a negative number by default. Because if price goes up, quantity demanded will decrease. And if price decreases, quantity demanded will increase. So if we have a 30% reduction in percentage change in price, then we're going to have a positive number of percentage change in quantity demand. But economists, we just ignore the minus sign, right? We always ignore the minus sign. We take the absolute value of the number, right? So we take the absolute value of that number. So it's important, if you're going to look at this, especially when you're doing your Connect assignment, that's an important lesson, right? Now, you're not going to have to do this on a quiz for me ever. And I don't even like people who teach intro to micro. But if you want it to get really complicated, you actually have to use a little more math involved to come up with the actual percentage change in quantity demand over percentage change in price. And I'm going to show you why, even though we're not going to go over this. All right, if we're talking about a difference between the price between $8 and $7, that's a decrease by 1/8. But if we went from 7 up to 8, that's an increase from 1/7. Just like if we went from quantity from 1 to 2, that's 100% increase. But when price went from 7 to 8, and quantity demand that went from 2 to 1, that's a 50% decrease. So to figure out coefficient of elasticity over this range, we actually have to use a little more complex formula called the midpoint formula, right? Now, again, you're not going to have to do this, but here's what you absolutely positively need to know from a practical standpoint. After we do the math, after we measure percentage change in quantity demand over percentage change in price, this is what you need to know. This is let's get to the heart and soul of it. Let's skip the mathy math stuff. If the result is greater than 1, demand is elastic. And the higher it is, the more elastic demand is. So if this were 5, demand is more elastic than 2, more responsive, right? If you have a result less than 1, demand is inelastic, which means if we just went over something like, okay, the demand for gasoline is going to be highly inelastic, right? Now, I never done this, but you probably do it real fast. Maybe somebody did it, right? I'm just kind of curious. What is the coefficient of elasticity for gasoline? So just go 0.26, right? Definitely a lot less than 1, right? Because we know it's going to be highly inelastic. You got to buy gas, right? So let's do something that's where it's a luxury item. What is the coefficient of elasticity of new automobiles? This one comes out to not quite as high as I thought, like 1.75, but still pretty. Oh no, there it is. Okay, 2. Okay, 2 points. So definitely more elastic, right? So that's what you need to know is after you do the math, interpretation. All right, that's what's most important for us. Now, let's talk about 2 more things before we get the heck out of here. First, the total revenue test. This is going to be important throughout our study of micro, so this one's kind of what more important than the coefficient of elasticity. Let's say we're producing a product and we need to know how changes in price affects sort of the amount of revenue we're collecting as the firm. Well, first, how do we calculate total revenue? This is an easy one. Right? The total revenue we collect as a company, as a firm, as a producer, we take the price we sell the item for, the product, times the quantity we sell. That's easy. So let's start with an easy number. So, okay, let's assume right now that we're charging $2 per unit. And we're collecting, or sorry, we're selling 10 units. So our total revenue, therefore, is price, $2 times 10, 20. So that's the firm's total revenue for the moment. And we're contemplating lowering price. Now, we know that we will sell more if we lower price. That's not the question. Our question is, will we collect more or less revenue? Right? So let's put it to the test based on our demand schedule for our goods. So if we lower price to $1, what happens to total revenue? Well, demand is relatively elastic here. All right, demand is relatively elastic. We see that by lowering price from $2 to $1, supply demand increases from 10 all the way to 40. So price down, total revenue up. So when demand is elastic, price and total revenue move in the opposite direction, right? And that's an important observation, especially when you start thinking about the discussion question about minimum wage, right? If the demand for low-skilled workers is elastic, then raising the minimum wage might be bad. Why is that? Because let's say we started at $1 and we're the firm. We were charging $1, we're selling 40, total revenue of 40, and we raised the price of our item by $1. Well, our total revenue actually decreases from 40 down to 20. So raising price doesn't mean we collect more revenue. When demand is elastic, the opposite. Price up, total revenue down. So when demand is inelastic, we would expect the opposite, which is what we're going to observe. When demand is inelastic, price and total revenue move in the same direction. All right, price down, total revenue down. Price up, total revenue up when demand is inelastic. And we're going to come back to this one. It's like, okay, what if we're a monopoly? Well, then we would never want to set price in the inelastic portion of the demand curve. That would be bad for us. All right, now we have a general idea of what elasticity of demand is. Let's look one more time here. Let's talk about, now let's talk about the extreme cases, then we'll look one more time at demand curves. All right. So here are the extreme cases. Perfectly inelastic. What is this saying? This says no matter what price you charge, supply and demand, it will be the same. So if this is 50 on the quantity axis, the horizontal axis, it doesn't matter if you charge me a penny, $1, $5, $10, $50, $100, I'm going to buy the same amount. Now, in the real world, where would you find this? Very, very rare.
Electricity.
But even then, people would find ways to cut. You know, you're like, okay, if the price of my electric bill was going up, you'd be yelling at your kids, don't turn the damn lights on. You know, you'd be like, and that's what people do, right? You know, I remember down the shore when the price, like, that's why I went to solar panels, honestly, right? But if you were diabetic and you were taking insulin and your doctor said, take 50 milligrams, maybe it might be milliliters, right? Because it's, I don't know, it's a liquid. Take 50 milliliters per day. Well, you don't care if they're giving it away or it's $25 per milliliter. You're going to take that amount because, you know, that's what's keeping you healthy. You don't want to take more and you don't want to take less. But again, that's going to be the very, very rare case. When you even see this when people have to take meds and they're strapped for their budget, they'll cut back. Demand will be highly inelastic, but not perfectly inelastic. Now, the other case, perfectly elastic. This is going to have application for us when we study perfect competition. In this case, you're like, okay, price changes just a little bit. Price goes up just a teeny fraction, you sell nothing, right? So let's say this is $7 per unit. We'll call it per bushel. Let's say you're the farmer, right? So if you try to raise price from $7 to $7.25, you sell nothing. No one buys from you. So you can sell as much as little as you want at the price, the market price, but demand is perfectly elastic. Right? You'd be a fool to lower price because you could sell it at that $7, but you have zero pricing power. So we're going to talk about this in detail when we examine one producer in a purely competitive market that's manufacturing or selling a standardized product, and they really have no pricing power, right? Now, last observation, right? We talk about this. Generally speaking, your typical downward sloping demand curve, right? So if we just go back up to pretty much where we started for the evening, when we talk about your typical downward sloping demand curve, right, this portion of the demand curve tends to be highly elastic. And then as we move down to the lower portion of the demand curve, this tends to be highly inelastic. And it's simply a math thing because, you know, up here you're talking about, okay, percentage change in price isn't that much from 5 to 4, but percentage change in quantity demand is quite high. Right, so a big number over a small number generates a coefficient of elasticity greater than 1, and down here is the opposite. Percentage change in price is quite substantial. Percentage change in quantity demand, not that substantial. So that's your typical downward sloping demand curve. But when you look at the shape of the demand curve, you can make an observation. So demand is not the same as slope, but the slope tells us something about elasticity. I should say, sorry, elasticity is not the same as slope, but the slope definitely tells us something about elasticity. Now, I'll explain that in a moment. Here we go. So if you see these two demand curves, this demand curve is relatively flat. That's a relatively elastic demand curve. This demand curve is relatively steep, relatively inelastic demand, right? So the top demand curve, you just see there like this is the demand for something where it's a luxury item, or it's a higher percentage of your income, or there's plenty of substitutes, or you had lots of time to make your decision or change your buying habits. Down bottom, this is demand curve for where there are very few substitutes, or it's a necessity, or you don't have much time to change your buying habits, or it's a very low percentage of your income, right? Now, when you're analyzing a product, it might not be, it doesn't, all four characteristics might not be present. We go with the ones that are most prevalent. So it's interesting to say, okay, what about the demand for toothpaste? Well, the demand for toothpaste is going to be highly inelastic. But the demand for Crest toothpaste, one brand, will be highly elastic because there are substitutes, right? But keep these in mind, because when you're analyzing the minimum wage debate, you have to ask, is the demand for low-skilled workers elastic? Are buyers responsive? Can producers find substitutes, right? Or is demand highly inelastic, where, a rise in the price that by a government mandated wage will actually create more revenue for the workers in that industry, right? If demand's inelastic, raising the price means there's going to be a significant decrease in supply and demand. That means unemployment in the real world, people losing jobs, right? All right, that should be more than enough economics for this week. If you have any questions or need my assistance, don't hesitate to ask. All right, my man, have a good week. Good
Yeah,
luck
you too.
completing all the assignments. All right, take care, bud.
All right, thanks.